Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about the concept of lipids. And we'll start with a very basic definition that lipids are fats and oils that are commonly used. All right. So next up, we'll take a look at the classification of lipids as to what different types of lipids are available, which are fatty acids, triglycerides, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes. So these are the 5 types of lipids that we will discuss more about on the next slide. Now we'll take a look at the characteristics of lipids. And the very first basic characteristic is that they are nonpolar in nature. And nonpolar basically means they are hydrophobic. Now, hydrophobic basically means hydro stands for water, H2O, and phobia means fear. So they do not mix very well with water, is the basic idea. They do not mix well with H2O. Point number B, they are mostly made up of carbon-hydrogen bonds. And in the previous chapters, we understood that carbon-hydrogen bonds are nonpolar in nature. Sorry. Next, the basic function of lipids or fats is that they are used for storing energy for long term. That's their function. Next, they also make up the cell membrane. And in this category, especially phospholipids make up the cell membrane. Next, they also provide thermal insulation and protection during cold and winter season basically. All right, so on this slide, we took a look at the characteristics or features of lipids. Next up, we'll start with the very first type of lipid, that is fatty acids. Sorry about that. All right. So the basic definition of fatty acids is that it is a long chain of hydrocarbons with a carboxyl group in the end. So there's a carboxyl group in the end, and there's a long chain of hydrogen and carbon bonds. Next up, I'll show you an example with its structure formula also. And you will just draw a long chain like this, showing the carbon and hydrogen. This basically stands for carbon. And there are 3 hydrogen atoms here, whereas each one of these is going to be having 2 hydrogen. And the more important part over here is your carboxyl group. All right, an important thing to understand here is that this section of our fatty acid is polar in nature, or we can say hydrophilic, likes water. And this section of our fatty acid is non-polar in nature, or hydrophobic. All right, so that was the basic information about fatty acids. Now on the next slide, we will take a look at what are the different types of fatty acids. All right, the very first type of fatty acids are called saturated fatty acids. And it is the same structural formula that I gave you on the last slide for the example. And it's a very simple chain of hydrocarbons with the carboxyl group in the end. And over here, the difference is you'll have 3 hydrogen, whereas in the middle always you'll have 2 hydrogen atoms. And this is the same thing that we looked at on the last slide as well. Now, what are the features of saturated fats? There are no double bonds. These are all single bonds. Next, saturated fats are solids at room temperature. And example could be butter, or another thing that is very common now in the stores is ghee. Ghee is basically clarified butter, and it is used a lot in Indian cooking. All right. Next, we are going to take a look at the second type of fatty acid, which is unsaturated. And we will start with the structural formula. And the main difference here is there will be a double bond. Pretty much the same thing everywhere else. The only difference is double bonds, and hence there will be changes in the features as well. So the first important one, double bonds, which we did not see in the saturated fats. So basically you're losing 2 hydrogen atoms for every double bond. And they tend to be liquid at room temperature. And one of the example could be vegetable oil. All right. We will now move on to third type of fatty acid, which is trans fatty acid, although it is actually a type of unsaturated only. And it comes under the category of unsaturated. And basically what happens is we'll take a look at its structural formula and it will make some more sense to you. So here what happens is you'll have one hydrogen atom on this side and the other one will be on this side. So that is basically what is happening. In trans fatty acids, your hydrogen is on the opposite side. Everything else, again, the same. So hydrogen atoms on the double bonds are on the opposite sides. That's important. Next example, margarine, or some classifications of peanut butter are also, they do come under it, and it's not very good for your heart. So some restaurants, are told to not use it because in their recipes and stuff, because it's not very good for health. All right. We are done with looking at fatty acids. Now we will move to the second type of lipids, which was in our list, triglycerides. All right, so triglycerides are basically formed by, first let us highlight tri and glycerol here. Hence, when we combine glycerol and three fatty acids, as a result of this chemical reaction, we end up getting triglycerides and three water molecules. Hence, this is a dehydration synthesis. Now we are going to take a look at the same thing in structural formula. So let us show you glycerol, and they are combining with three fatty acids. So let us draw structural formula for fatty acids that we have already looked at. So I'm on the first one is a saturated. No double bonds here. Next up, same thing. Monounsaturated. Single double bond. One double bond, I mean. And then the other one, now here is actually polyunsaturated fat, which has, poly means many, so it could have many double bonds here, and we have the same thing going here. Now what basically happens is that we will have these combine to form the water molecules, H2O, All right. So we are combining glycerol plus the three fatty acids. They undergo dehydration synthesis to give us triglycerides. Hence, we end up with plus 3 water molecules. So I hope it makes some sense to you over here as to how we ended up getting. And this is going to be our triglyceride that we got here. All right, next slide, we will continue with this concept, triglyceride, and look at more features of triglycerides. Point number 3 about triglycerides, that the above molecule that I had the arrow on, above molecule is a triglyceride. Next point, they are huge energy storage function. They don't mix well with water. And another important thing is that above chemical reaction is reversible. So what do I basically mean by that is that if I have a triglyceride and 3 water molecules, they will undergo hydrolysis to actually give back glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So that is what it means by the reversible reaction. All right, that was all about triglycerides. We will now move on to the third lipid on our list of classifications was phospholipids. So we are going to move on to phospholipids. Now, the very first point of discussion under phospholipids is that they are made of a phosphate group, a glycerol molecule, and two fatty acid chains. All right, next point, we are going to look at the structural formula of a phospholipid. So the R here basically is, it will have a nitrogen atom, the remaining formula. And I'm showing you the phosphate group now, connected with a glycerol. And then by now I'm sure you know that this is your saturated fat and unsaturated fat. All right, so one nitrogen atom here. This is going to be your phosphate group. This is your glycerol. And these are your two fatty acids chains. So that's your structural formula. On the next slide, we will continue information about the phospholipids itself. All right, let us have it fly away. Next up, point number 3, phospholipids contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and nitrogen. What is the function? They make up the cell membrane. Point number 5, phosphate group in the phospholipid is polar in nature. That means it really likes water. And the fatty acid group, carbon and hydrogen bonds, is nonpolar in nature. It doesn't like water that much. All right, let us move on to the next classification that we had on our list, which was steroids. All right, the very first feature of steroids is that they have a fused ring structure in their structural formula. Next is they are hydrophobic in nature. And then we'll take a look at examples. Cholesterol, structural formula of cholesterol. All right, another example of a steroid is the estrogen, the female hormone. And you can find the structural formula of estrogen in your textbook. We will now move to the last in our classification of lipids was point number E, waxes. And basically the first point to note is that they are nonpolar in nature. That means they are hydrophobic. Paraffin wax is a very common one that is used as a commercial wax. And the formula for paraffin wax is C31H64. Next, wax ester. Little different than paraffin wax. Now, the basic function or a feature is that this wax covers the feathers of aquatic birds and leaves of plants. So it just helps protect them, when they come in regular contact with water. And because of its hydrophobic nature, the water doesn't stick and hence protection happens. The candles found commercially are made of paraffin wax. So that was all about the different types of lipids that are found. We took a look at all of them, and I hope it made some sense to you. Thank you for watching and taking notes. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.